Today, I'm joined by Jyoti Wadhwa, a global leader in governance and enterprise technology risk. Jyoti spent her career helping large organizations figure out how to adopt emerging technologies safely, translating AI principles, regulatory expectations, and enterprise risk frameworks into governance models that actually work in practice. She's advised Fortune 100 companies and US federal agencies, including the Federal Reserve and the US Treasury, on governance, cybersecurity, and technology risk, and has led large global programs overseeing risk across hundreds of projects and billions of dollars of platform revenue. She's a contributor to global AI governance standards efforts, including work with FINOS, and she's helping shape how enterprises think about responsible AI at scale. So, Jyoti, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks, Rob. I'm really pleased to be here. Excited to talk a little bit of risk language with you.
Did I capture that in the introduction? Is there any other way you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Look, I think you captured a lot, and I think the breadth of what you captured is um, even interesting for me to hear, as I've been a practitioner and leader across multiple sectors. But more, I resonate with being a collaborator, right, with industry
Mm.
as well as with team leaders and even team members as we address this huge landscape of technology and going through many transformations and continuing the charge. So thank you for that.
Yeah, so I mean, you've basically spent your career collaborating with people on like technology governance, right? And how did you get into this? What was the entry point for you?
Yeah, technology has been something that is fundamental. So from an infrastructure perspective is really the area that I entered in terms of telecommunication infrastructure. And that has just led to ongoing growth as we went into, internet and distribution at a backbone level, and then into services, and then into a very focused area of cyber and security at the application
Mm.
level. And now we're at agentic AI. So I think, covering the whole sort of ecosystem, the value chain, started off from the basics of, hey, just, how are we communicating? And some of that remains consistent with how are we communicating, how are we sharing information in a secure manner.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks back, I was talking to Colin Eberhardt, who you work with on the FINOS AI governance framework
Yeah.
project. And we had a great chat about the AI governance framework. And we talked a lot about like coding agents and all this kind of thing. It was a really, and Colin's quite a good technologist, so it was a really fun chat. But I think I think what it's fair to say is that you are really experienced in working with large organizations who are adopting, as you say, like going through these technological transformations and helping them do this in a secure way. Um, so I'm really interested to get into that with you because it's not just about individuals adopting technologies. We have to think about technologies in terms of massive organizations and how they adopt them. And it's a different process, right?
Yeah. So recently at NetApp, I was overseeing the development of a technology risk governance framework across 15 lines of business, about 160 products, and needed to coordinate 3 lines of defense, right? First line ownership of the technology, driven by use cases, the mission use cases, and then, oversight requirements that help to inform executives and board meetings and, our risk posture. And in terms of then also, having that auditability to do business so that we're responsible to our customers and shareholders. So that scalability is certainly something that requires collaboration. And I think that's a great place to start is, hey, as technology starts to change, who are the right people we need at the table?
All right, so you've thrown in a whole load of jargon there. I think we need to unpack a bit because there's a lot going on there. And um, I think probably most listeners are going to be aware of like things like, I don't know, ChatGPT, where they just go on and they start talking to ChatGPT. And in a way, like governance is about it's kind of about doing that kind of thing, but safely and at scale in a large organization. And so you mentioned stakeholders and use cases and lines of defense. So can you just break it down a bit and talk about maybe what the best practices around governance are for adopting a new technology? Because you've already sort of dived into a bunch of different stuff there. Uh,
Yeah, 100%. Let's unpack it a little bit, right? So many different layers. So, as we look at AI, right? That's top of mind everywhere.
hmm,
And it's a new technology. It's another technology transformation. So when we're looking across the life cycle, we want to understand, well, who needs to sit at the table, right? Who needs to make these decisions as we look at uh, bringing in models like LLMs, whether they're at an enterprise level, something like Copilot, right, on one spectrum. And then on the other spectrum is okay, if we want to bring in some tools into our development environment, as we shift from, a secure development lifecycle to, the coding agents you were talking to, an AI SDLC, well, who needs to sit at the table there? So I think first, in terms of a governance structure, is ensuring that depending on the use case, we have the right people at the table.
hmm,
And if we look at, okay, we just want to be able to enable our organization in totality around using, or improving productivity, not doing those sort of manual things that can be automated quickly, or if there were patterns within data, right? So using Microsoft Pilot, what do we need to do and what are our guidelines? Well, we're looking at IT and we're looking at the top use cases across every department. So from there, we then form policies, right? So from a governance structure, having the right leaders helping, they will help prioritize, where we are in our enterprise adoption, in which area in the organization, right? And right now we're talking about Copilot, who needs to be at the table, and then the policy that needs to be updated. So, for example, what should my policy say from an administrative perspective? How can that be communicated throughout the organization? What cultural or transformational agents need to be in place to ensure that there's a common understanding? What resources should be in there for a common understanding? How do we measure this and make sure we're capturing risk from that perspective? And then as we move to deeper adoption in engineering environments, right? This is where we're developing cloud-based services, the bread and butter, the revenue of organizations. There we want to ensure that we have a common forum once again of, hey, for our policy, this policy, what kind of tool stack do we need? But what is it that we want to capture in terms of visibility of what's changing in our environment, both from our assets, how they're being affected, but also what we're bringing in from a third party perspective. And so that's a different, set of experts and leaders at the table that are going to prioritize those decisions. And once again, update policies, both administrative and technical policies, as guardrails throughout the proliferation. So I hope that started to unpack a little bit the breadth of what governance means across, an AI life cycle of understanding the use case, collecting the right people, um, having that prioritization, and then putting in the controls or the technical policies that's needed to then finally identify risk. What is not
yeah.
being captured?
All right, let me see if I can play that back to you and if I've understood all the different parts. So, if on a Tuesday, say, I decided I wanted to use Copilot, because that was the example you brought up. So, if I want to, I might just download VS Code and start using it, have a play with it, and decide, oh yeah, no, this kind of does what I want. This is great, or nah, it's not great. I'm gonna throw it in the bin. But then when we scale up to an organization with potentially thousands of people, it gets more complicated. And so you're talking about having use cases where you kind of put yourself in the minds of all of these different people in the organization who are are doing exactly that same thing. They're thinking, oh, maybe I'll use Copilot, and you're trying to figure out what it is they might do with it. And then when you say, well, and then obviously it can't be just one person in the organization deciding this. It has to be lots of people getting together and agreeing something. And so that's all your collaborators that you're talking about. And the policy is really that agreement, isn't it? Rather than being like a dry document, it's basically the whole organization agreeing with itself whether or not they're going to decide to use Copilot going forward, or and how they're going to use it and what they're going to use it for. So essentially, what we're doing is it's a way of like organizing a decision on a massive scale, isn't it? Across a huge org chart that's got lots of different, different disparate components in the org chart. Is that a fair?
Absolutely. We're on the same page with governance, right? So how are we governing our environment? How are we operating? How are we going to operate differently? So I think we're definitely reading off the same page and bringing that structure in an organization.
And so, I mean, the obvious thing, as soon as you hear something like that sort of description I've given you, it sounds hard. It sounds kind of slow, and you know, um, that's but sometimes governance does have that reputation for slowing things down. But what's I guess part of the way of doing good governance is to actually effect these changes quickly and get it done in a reasonable time, because it seems essential to make sure that everyone is on the same page with these things. But getting that kind of agreement is hard, right?
Yeah, what makes it hard, I think it kind of getting everyone at the table. Once we're at the table, then we can quickly make those decisions in terms of prioritization. So
Yeah.
it actually enables business. It actually enables innovation at scale, because if we can identify those criteria of what needs to be prioritized, then we have focus, and the decision makers are there to enable that and also proliferate it very efficiently across the organization. So governance, in fact, what I feel that I've been very effective at is ensuring that it's shifted from that oversight, that barrier or burden, to enabling, hey, how do I get from A to B quickly? Because we need to meet, some business
Mhm.
requirements. I can't slow down. I can accelerate, but I can't slow down. So governance, I've seen it really help.
So this is the Risk First podcast, obviously, and what I always try to do is try to relate back the types of work people are doing with risks and the risks that they're managing, because I maintain that all work is risk management. So I think you've got a number of things going on here. You're dealing with a coordination risk where you're trying to coordinate an entire company around a particular idea, or as you say, a policy. So there's coordination risk being addressed here. And you've also got operational risk being addressed, because what you're trying to do is to ensure some kind of, as you said earlier, guardrails. You're trying to make sure that if you're introducing a new technology, it's used correctly and safely, and that everybody's on the same page with what it's allowed to be used for and not allowed to be used for. Back to your use cases again. And then I think the other thing that you're addressing here is like complexity risk. If every person in the organization was allowed to make their own technology choices and do what the hell they liked, it would quickly end up in complete chaos with a million different tools. It wouldn't be just Copilot, it would be thousands of different LLMs being used for all kinds of different things. Every single different cloud provider would be in the mix, and it would be a complete carnage, right? So,
Yeah.
so I kind of see you dealing with all those risks, but did I miss any?
Yeah, I mean, I like to bucket risks for my own sanity in a few very high level areas, because, both of you and I being risk practitioners, it's very useful to be granular with risk, right? But
Yeah.
at the same time, the largest risk is decision risk. And what I mean by that is, what do we prioritize at what stage to ensure we move at the speed of business? So you mentioned a little bit coordination risk. Well, I would put that under in one of the buckets, but at a very high level, and as we are in this AI area, I see one bucket as regulatory and compliance risk, right? So for, financial services, as an example, what are all the regulations that I must comply to just to operate as a business? And am I meeting best practices against that, right? So those are FISMA or FINRA or SR11 or, NIST, right? NIST AI, and then, EU. All of that is this regulatory and compliance risk. And then we move to, okay, what's coming up now at the forefront is, as related to that, is data and privacy risk, right? What am I exposing now that wasn't exposed before? Am I set to do that? And if not, what's my gap? And how do I capture that with what I have in place today? And the other one, I think, touches on the coordination risk, which I would put in the bucket of operational risk, right? This is organizations' limited visibility to understand what is in its environment. And if it cannot see it and understand it, it cannot act on it. So in those buckets is, how I tend to then create more of a layered approach to, okay, what kind of risk are we dealing with? How can we create the right measure for it, the right scorecard for it, and decision-making ability to remediate against it.
Right, yeah, and so, yeah, I mean, the other thing you brought up there is obviously regulations, and you and I both work in finance, so there's loads of regulations to account for, and this sort of kind of feeds in, doesn't it? Because all of these decisions and policies and governance decisions have to reflect back on the regulations. So the regulations are part of the environment that we work in, and therefore, yes, there has to be that. Essentially, we're dealing with legal risk there, where we don't want to be in contravention of any laws that are going on, and those laws are written up in regulations like some of the ones you mentioned. And so, yeah, so that's important as well, that any governance behavior and work that we do accounts for all of that. And that's from my experience, just keeping on top of that is pretty hard work. There's usually a lot of reading to be done, a lot of understanding, thinking about the mindset of regulators and trying to work out what it is they're really after and all this kind of stuff, and then responding to them to try and show your workings out and make sure they understand that you've paid attention to them, this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we're continuing to unpack it a bit from what I said earlier is like, what is in law? How do you then translate that into that policy in an organization, right? That common understanding of how we are going to decide to behave, and then translating that into a technical policy. Hey, how's my tool stack going to capture this, right? And how do I prove that, hey, I'm a law-abiding corporate player here? So it's definitely a very complex environment for sure.
Yeah, okay. So I think we've done quite a good job there of sort of setting the scene of what risk and governance are all about. So I want to get on to now ask you about the FINOS SDLC governance project, software development lifecycle governance. So so just setting the scene here, this is like a group of different financial services firms realizing that they need to have governance around software development and coming together to try and describe what good looks like. So this is like governance at yet another level, isn't it? Because we've now moved beyond just trying to get one organization to agree on what good looks like and write policies on it. And we're now talking about whole, slices of the industry and trying to agree a model for them. So can you talk a bit about that and explain how did that start, first of all?
Right. So we're talking about SDLC, right? Is
Yeah.
that, yeah. So once again, as we look back to what is our organization doing in terms of its mission, what is its core business value, and in order to do business, right? What is our legal posture that's most defensible, that protects our customers, that protects our shareholders and our organization. So, as we look at the SDLC, we're now in the engineering environment, the product environment, the service environment. And in terms of deploying our service or product, what are the activities that we're conducting for that compliant and safe product or service that we're
Hmm.
deploying. So in terms of the SDLC, there's so many wonderful best practices out there that have evolved over time. I've been in the industry of application security SDLC longer than I can remember, unfortunately, but fortunately, and 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 I've seen the leaps and strides that we've made from just reviewing source code, then moving into RASP and runtime application security practices, and as we continue, right. Being able to bring best practices to third party dependencies, bring better hygiene there, understanding better velocity of vulnerability remediation, and working with those best practices and best practices for patching after something is found. So I'm saying a lot around C because it is a very, very complex, I would say, art to produce the products and services that we do. That, and I framed it at the top with, hey, it's still a legal environment that we're deploying this with. So we need to do it still at scale, still with innovation, to meet our posture of being legally compliant and responsible. And as we compile the SDLC, we're producing our SBOM, right? And what requires us to produce our SBOM, and even that is evolving in terms of the transparency that is required even for national infrastructure. So as AI comes into the picture, we're moving from deterministic, controlled environments of how you develop software to now these autonomous environments that are deciding within their own reasoning loops and tools of how it's going to produce code. And so even the legal community now is scratching their head a little bit and is trying to understand, okay, well, what do I need to do to protect, our stakeholders to ensure that we don't be unsafe or irresponsible and how we make these decisions. So that's really, I think, the largest question is moving into this agentic environment. How do we make these controls, right, at that technical level be aligned with our sort of administrative policy, right, as it's
Yes.
probabilistic and persistent, having those persistent controls. What are your thoughts on that, Rob? I'd
Well,
like to
okay.
take too.
I want to get into that with you. I think that's the key area, right? But before we get there, I just wanted to ask you one other question because one of the key, I can envisage people listening to this and thinking, oh, yeah, okay, she's mentioned SAST and like vulnerability remediation, upstream dependencies, probably like things like license compliance, all this sort of stuff. But then they're probably going, yeah, yeah, we do all that, we do all that, we do all that. But I guess the question then would be, well, why should we be defining this in FINOS? Why is it important for FINOS to have a project defining this rather than just each company does it themselves?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And you know, um, standards are very helpful in having um, in supporting innovation, right? In supporting at what organizations do, the core value once again of what's provided and what's received, right? So FINOS provides a fabric of standardization across the financial ecosystem. It provides an approach to easily and seamlessly integrate a common way of doing, XYZ, such as, we're also involved in the Common Cloud Control Group, right?
Hmm.
If these are controls that are identified in a multi-cloud environment, and they are then pervasively understood by all financial players in an ecosystem, whether you're whatever type of financial institution you are, then you all of a sudden have created something standardized that if you adopt, and you know that your ecosystem is also adopting it, you then have a very you have an accelerated path to adopting innovation across the industry. So I think that's the power of Finos. That's the power of standards like that overall. Um, what's your thought on that?
Well, I think, yeah, this is something I write about in my book. It's like the idea that, so a standard in a way, well, a standard like this is basically kind of a baseline where everybody's saying this is what we think good looks like, and coming to an agreement on like the idea of good. Maybe at some point in the future it might get turned into a like a benchmark where people are benchmarked against this, or even a legal requirement that you have to have certain quality control steps in your SDLC framework. But at the moment, even just writing down the steps and agreeing with other people what good looks like is a really important thing. And I talk in the book about how like storytelling is a way of sharing risks between different people. Like the story of the boy who cried wolf or something is a good example of the risk of like alarm fatigue, where if you get alerted to something over and over again, eventually you start ignoring that alert. So it's a nice little encapsulation of a risk story. And I think in a way, this is the same thing. This is like saying, if you don't do all of these things, you're going to be exposed to risks that you don't want to be exposed to. So this is how you stay on the happy path and avoid uh, various pitfalls. And I think if you look at something like the Common Cloud Controls Project, or the AI Governance Framework Project, or even the Open Source Readiness Project, and probably the SDLC Controls Project, what they tend to do is they outline all the risks, and then they give you all all the things, all the controls that you need to adopt to avoid those risks. So they kind of give you both sides of the picture. It's like so yeah, they're telling you both halves of it. And I think that'll probably happen in SDLC controls as well, where it won't be just like a prescriptive list of you must do this and that and this. It'll be like you should do these things, and this is why. These are the risks you're going to avoid by
Yeah.
adopting these processes.
You mentioned something that I think is at a core of that overall um, process that is identifying the risks, right? And sort of storytelling or having a commonality around that.
Mm,
Because in Finos, I think there's also a lot of great work and collaboration being done to not only identify, hey, what are the risks maybe in the financial sector, but do they map to industry understood risks, right? So mapping back to OWASP, mapping back to MITRE, and other, common industry bodies that help to bring that glue not only within financial services but across the industry that speak the same language of being heavily regulated itself and just generally best practices. So I like your analogy of like, hey, this is what good looks like. This is the story, the good path to stay on. Be Little Red Riding Hood and don't veer off the path, right? Or else there's a bad wolf, or well, however you want to frame it, right? I think it does create a good baseline for sure.
so that, I think that brings me on to the thing you really wanted to talk about, which was like uh you kind of teased it earlier by saying we're entering a world where the SDLC pipeline, far from being this like deterministic pipeline where stuff goes in one end and you know how it's going to come out the other end, we're now adding in AI, generative systems, which essentially are non-deterministic and can do who knows what along the way. And so a build is not like a repeatable build anymore, is it?
Yeah.
That was always the goal in like the noughties and the 90s, was to try and build systems where you had a repeatable build. Um, but that's kind of at jeopardy here right now.
Yeah, and jeopardy is a word, but I liked your other word of baseline too. So we're creating a new baseline, right? And what does that new baseline look like? What can it look like, and how do we achieve it? So I think industry is doing a relatively good job where, people are not in a unsafe rush to just take their foot off the brake and move to fast deployments. We're being measured in understanding what is the use case that I want to focus on to create a workflow, right? Where I'm not only embedding AI capability of agents that have specific skills, but starting with secure architectures. So that's one of the forums that I really enjoyed AI in AI governance forums is the architecture group, where we
Mm.
created a multi-agent reference architecture, mapped it to industry risks and threats, as well as FINOS ones that were guided by the AI or the FINOS AI governance framework.
Yeah.
So we have cross mapping going there. I took it to the next step of cross mapping it to 42001 as well as the CSA's AICM. And all of this to kind of say that, okay, if we're having agents, then what's a relatively, secure baseline architecture that maybe I can start with in my environment and then add the other requirements that I might need in my particular environment. But it's given a great baseline to understand what should my agent do, right? Where should I put those other controls that I need, and make sure that there's a systematic approach to this. So in terms of, you know, what you had mentioned before, it's probabilistic. We really don't know where it's going to go. I think there's an approach that we can create baselines in terms of understanding or limiting, this behavior to where we want. And I think that's what's really under discussion right now, which is really exciting and creative.
Yeah, I think you're right. This is a huge area of innovation right now, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the control space evolves to account for this as a new technology, as a new sort of software development approach. I think it is fascinating, and it seems every few weeks there's something new comes out. Um, there's all these stories, obviously, about people like running OpenClaw and like losing all their emails or running up huge bills and all this kind of stuff, which is obviously scary. And these are the sort of controls we need. Um,
Exactly.
uh, and then also, obviously, we have every new week there's a new AI tool comes out, and so you're thinking, well, okay, great, I can go and try this out. But then it would be nice to have some kind of like control catalog where I can check off and say, does it have this control? Does it have this control? And so on. And I think like that kind of badging is completely absent at the moment. People are not in that space of thinking, oh, I need this to be a production workhorse. This is just all shiny new stuff that people are trying out. But I think we're going to get there at some point where we have to have like some control badging on AI development.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree with you more. 100%. Look, and once again, going back to decision risk, going back to that prioritization, hey, which use case and in what environment do what controls or policies apply, right? From, do I keep a certain capability just in my test lab environment in a sandbox and create a policy around that and ensure that, if there's anything detected in my environment of any API calls going outside of it, it creates an alert and then I can control my environment, right? Those are
Mm.
use cases that now will help that decision making. How do I put in those safeguards needed to try things out? And what do I want to enable for, production environments, right? As we look at threat intel and the ability for our third party tools to do better pattern matching of different types of risks coming into environments, or just intel that they can give us from what they're seeing more broadly. Those require, those are less invasive, yet they are AI enabled. So I think
Yeah.
just on the use case, right, we can come up with, you know, um, the different risk level that we need to address to understand those baselines and get to that environment of ubiquity. But Rob, I'm going to also agree with you. Like, we're just moving a gazillion miles a second. That and there's something new every day. Even if you look at, Claude Code's ability to do its claims of doing almost the whole SDLC, right? Testing, right within its environment of code. Yet what's missing is the processes. It's the governance. It's the people at the table to say, is this proven? Is it proven for this use case, right? So I don't think we're going to get there as fast as we're innovating, because, people's emails that are stolen from Claude Code, they were obviously missing some controls,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And they didn't understand their use case. So, in regulated environments, I think it will absolutely follow a process through that prioritization to address the decision risks we're facing.
So a term I learned today. So I was talking about alert fatigue earlier, and this is kind of a related term, vigilance decrement. So this is the concept where when something does a pretty good job pretty much all the time, but so let's say you're the overseer of the thing. You're like um, supposed to be keeping an eye on it. If something's doing a pretty good job all the time, your vigilance lowers because you're just used to it being right, and you're like, oh yeah, okay. And eventually you stop paying enough attention, and then when something goes wrong, you don't spot that thing happening. And obviously, this is like a this is what caught those open claw people out with the emails and stuff. They've obviously been playing with it for a while, and oh, it's great, it's doing all the stuff that I want it to do, and then they walk off, leave it alone, come back in the morning or something, and then calamity has occurred. And so this vigilance decrement thing, it's a real human psychological problem, isn't it? Because um, it's just how we work. We stop paying attention to things when they're boring and when they just work consistently. But this obviously has to tie into SDLC governance at some point, right? Have you got any thoughts about this and how we get around this?
Yeah, you've touched on two areas there. One is alert fatigue, right? We're more in the SOC environment of all these, things beeping and going off, and triaging is how I relate to that term a little bit more. In
Mm,
terms of vigilant decrement, it's now aligned with the human in the loop, right? Or on the loop, or
mm,
wherever it is on the loop, right? And
yeah.
how it's but it's that human capability. And I think the capability is most pronounced in approval cycles, right? So the automation should capture where something needs to be flagged according to policy, right? Once that's flagged in policy, then it needs to go through its governed triage to understand, is this real or not real, and how much information do we have informing of its integrity, right? And as those decisions then are made and more automations are putting it in the right workflows, whether it's at the developer level or if it's exceeded a threshold, it's now a risk and flagged at, an oversight level, there's still, a time ticking in terms of the vigilance that's needed. So all of this is a process, and going back to governance, this is how we operate, right? This needs to be defined for the AI era, for the AI workflows that are coming up that need that extra uh, collaboration that we talked about earlier on. So if we have those processes in place, then it's really where humans in the loop come in place. We're at approval cycles at an oversight layer that carries the decision risk in a more material way, and they should be in a position to ensure that if there's any what'd you call it? Vigilance decrement,
Yeah, that's right.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
captured. Because, these automation flows are going to bring it all up to there. But if it's, been past 24 hours and you have, an admin open port in production and it's not being closed, well, it's very quickly going to escalate, and that vigilance decrement there should be a process to capture that.
Yeah, I kind of so I guess the important thing is that when somebody's writing policy or governance, there it needs to take account of human frailty, doesn't it? It needs to take account of like the psychological limitations of the humans that are on in or on the loop. I don't like the expression human on the loop actually, because I tell you
Yeah.
why, because that speaks to that whole vigilance decrement thing
Okay.
completely, because the human could just be like ignoring the loop and looking out the window instead of at the loop. Whereas if you're in the loop and it has to go through you, that kind of implies a bit more involvement. Um, but yes, that whole yeah, I kind of do worry that we're going to assume that the humans are going to be doing a really vigilant job, where perhaps psychology would suggest that that might over time reduce and not happen. That would be my worry about governance being written about AI right now.
Yeah, and once again, I think it's this collaboration needed to define the process with as much velocity that the business can support, to ensure that the humans in the loop are brought in at the right point for that discretion, I think.
Yeah, so they need or they need to be in the loop, and the loop needs to be sufficiently exciting and interesting to keep their
Yeah.
attention. Otherwise, they'll just drift off and just hit the button like Homer Simpson just pressing the yes button on the
Well,
power plant.
and that's what I think is interesting, is that the humans in the loop, it's not a one touch point, right? It's layered.
Mm.
If one person is missing it at one level, then the findings are the you know sh- uh, summarized into another level that are then summarized into a different level. So I think that layered approach of human in the loop is where you have it at your operational level, your director programmatic level, and then the executive board risk committee level, so that you have that ownership all the way through, to capture, I think, this risk that you're talking about, Rob.
Quite, yeah, and I quite like. I think a job that sounds quite exciting is red teaming. So where
Mhm.
you're sent in to go and hack into systems and break things. I think this sounds like quite a fun job, and I can sort of see that maybe in the future the human in the loop is is kind of a red team kind of job where the AI might be constructing the software and writing the software, and then you have humans sitting there reviewing it, but actively trying to hack into it and being rewarded for demonstrating the weaknesses in the AI generated code. I think that might be quite a fun approach to, and when I say fun, I mean like rewarding as opposed to drudgery approach to keeping the human in the loop. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, they'll probably be using some AI tools too to,
Oh yeah,
right,
yeah.
understand some
Fight
of it
fire with
too.
fire. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think pen testing is always been a critical step, especially before final deployment and ongoing checks of what we have deployed. I don't see that going away. And does it make the job more interesting? I think yes. for understanding, like, I'll be talking to my developer colleagues, and they're like, oh my goodness, the sloth that is produced by all this vibe coding or whatever, right? They're like, it's crazy. Will it help me get somewhere a little bit faster? Sure. Would I ever use that in my code? 100% no. So I think that speaks directly to if you're actually creating code, and you need to meet a certain standard to have it pass through those checks, you will not just be able to rely on this AI capability.
No, sure. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't want to repeat things I've said on previous episodes, but I think, yeah, I think humans are like a we are super reliable. That's our trait essentially.
Hmm.
Um, which is something that you cannot be said by about any of these modern systems or anything we've even constructed ever. Nothing lasts. But so I think we need to somehow leverage our own reliability. But the clever part is in designing the systems to do that and making it rewarding for people to be involved in those systems, I think. Okay,
Absolutely.
so let's change things up. So this is the Risk First podcast. So I want to know, and I don't want you to tell me the name of the company or anything, but I want you to tell me about some governance disaster you've experienced in your career, and yeah, what was learnt from it, and what I can learn from it from you telling me, I guess as well. Yeah, is that? Have you got anything in mind?
I think some of the governance disasters are like across every organization today as we bring in AI. So what I mean by that is, okay, where do we start? Do we even have a centralized repository of our LLMs coming in our environment? Um, and is it enterprise wide, or is it, siloed to one business unit? Where do we have visibility to that? Um, right there, just starting from basics, is a governance disaster today.
Hmm.
If I go to line of business one and I compare that to what's being used in line of business two and how it's being overseen, there might be, you know, LLMs that are brought in directly from the providers, whereas in other business units, they're provided through hyperscalers. Well, where's the overall enterprise policy that is ensuring that we're going to use, only LLMX, right? And
Yeah.
these are the users and the admins that will set policies to those. And this is our ability to monitor the environment to see anything else. Like, to me, that's a governance disaster today, to even get to that level. And then, it kind of goes on from there is, okay, well, the consistent controls, right? If I'm using an LLM from cloud A, then do I have those same set of controls in cloud B? Because
Yeah.
across my 20 businesses, we're using all clouds, right? So these are, I think, really real examples, really real. They are
Yeah.
materially real
That's an unfolding
examples.
governance disaster. Yeah. Actually,
Exactly,
that
exactly.
that I think, they say like history rhymes, but that to me feels exactly like the open source governance disaster. Where, at the beginning of open source, everyone was just downloading stuff off the internet and running it on their machines and sticking it in their code bases and all this sort of stuff. And over time, we've kind of like, whilst I talked a lot about on the previous episode about how we've like got this maturity model now where people start to care about license compliance or supply chain security or their software inventory or all these sorts of things. And I think you're basically talking about the same thing, but with just LLMs, and it's mad, isn't it, that we've learned nothing, and we're just repeating the same kind of mistake all over again.
Yeah, and I would almost rephrase it. Let's just say I'll be the half full cup here. Not to say you're the half empty, but it's another transformation. It
Yeah.
requires another lens. It requires, that rebuilding, which is the nature of technology. It's change management, and it needs to be programmatic, needs to be across the enterprise, needs to have consistency, and then an ability to identify something in an actionable way so that we capture it. But yes, we are rebuilding right now is I think at the forefront.
Yeah, and I think yeah, this sort of thing. I can definitely see the cycles now at this point in my career. It's like there's the same kind of cycles where we had these sort of operating system wars, and then we've had the cloud wars, and in each case there's just different types of lock-in going on, and I can see this happening. This is unfolding again now, where every vendor and his dog wants to try and lock you into some kind of crazy new LLM system that they're going to then sell you
Well,
for, and put a massive license fee on eventually. And
right. I mean, so RSA is coming up next week, and in terms of vendor, like even if we touch on the risk, I mean, the vendor landscape, I think, is just bubbled immensely in terms of all the single point solutions addressing a specific problem and maybe doing it really well, but very difficult for enterprises to navigate that whole environment to understand the alignment they need with the vendor ecosystem and the use cases that they're pursuing. So I think vendor risk, third party risk is very significant. To really, understand how we want to manage that type of risk, we have to reevaluate the process or add to it how these third parties might be coming into our environments and do a different type of assessment of that impact, right? Of AI enabled capabilities.
so we've talked quite a lot about how we're going to try and govern AI within large firms, but let's talk a bit about how governance itself might be affected by AI. And this is kind of new. I guess this is not happening so much yet, but I can foresee a time very soon where like people are reviewing like laws, and the laws are saying it's not this, it's that. And there's all these sort of AI isms in like laws. Yeah, I kind of feel like we're embarking on a point now where governance itself could be both aided and hindered by adoption of AI. So what do you think? How's that looking?
So in terms of, it sounds a little bit like, what comes first, the cart or the horse, or,
Sure. Yeah.
you know, um, i- governance and regulations. I don't think anything has changed in terms of them lagging behind innovation. If we are driven by providing value, then we are seeking innovation at scale to meet those customer needs and to provide the services as best as we can. Um, from that perspective, we're secure the way that we are going to market, and the laws typically stagger behind innovation's ability to leverage innovation to do that. So I think you know there's what's at risk, for organizations that are at the forefront is not only losing IP, it's ongoing, breaches, regulatory data breaches. Those high level regulations are still at place, but there's still ongoing reputational damage in addition to any sort of penalty impact they might have. And so I think what's super exciting about this whole domain of, governance risk, cyber, is that it is so innovative itself, right? It's at
Mm,
the edge of technology because it needs to protect so much.
yeah.
Ensure regulatory risk, protect against adversarial risks and threats, and so the capability of cyber protections, I think help to ensure that AI innovation can happen and can be adopted. I don't think the regulatory landscape will lead that at any point that I can foresee.
Okay, because so one of the things I talk about in the book is that the amount of regulation, both in in the EU and in the US, is actually increasing at like an exponential rate. Like the amount of new regulations coming out each year, which even which I guess has to be in some way a product of technology. There's more people are able to like produce regulations more quickly, I guess, or put them through government faster, or maybe there's just more people working in government. I'm not sure what it is, but anyway, the amount of regulation on the books is going up and up exponentially. And so I think that when regulators get their hands on AI tools, then this is going to explode still further. I think there's going to be
Yeah, you're
vast amounts
right.
of it.
Like, yeah, I think, and we even see it, right? We see international regulation coming out, leading by the EU, um, different laws coming out there. We have now state level activity coming out from Texas, from Utah,
Mm,
California relating to AI requirements, and more level activity is probably on the horizon. So I completely agree with you there, Rob. Is and it has a lot to do with privacy and data. So if I think some of those are stepping up to protect the individual, the consumer. But will those laws help to protect an enterprise against adversarial attacks and what's required? There might be a variance there. But
mm.
in terms of, being able to protect privacy, as data now is being used for everything and anything, I think you're absolutely right. We're going to see a lot more requirements.
Yeah, so I didn't look in the research into whether so into how it broke down between like regulations helping consumers or protecting businesses or anything like this. It was just like the sheer volume of regulation, and I think it's also a reflection of just the way in which the modern world is becoming more complicated. And so, because the world is so complicated, you need to have more rules to navigate it and to ensure people are correctly in it. Um, but yeah, it does make it much harder for for people responding to that regulation, for people in legal departments, or even just citizens as well.
Yeah, it is a challenge in terms of, the individual is also very enabled with um, AI capabilities. So if I'm a person that has started up my AI enabled business, then what do I need to be aware of as a independent company am collecting data, right? What am I now exposed to from a regulatory perspective? So I think you're on point, Rob, is that the
Yeah.
regulatory environment is going to become very complex. So just to pull the thread tiny bit more, then how do I prove I'm compliant? Who's going to check on me? Right? What are those auditability? So along with legal, I think this whole auditability requirement, ability to prove evidence-based compliance, I think that's a whole other area that will, mature.
And I think, I mean, the obvious answer is like, well, we're going to have AI helping us respond to all the regulation. But the other thing that we're sort of working on in both Common Cloud Controls and a bunch of other projects is that we try and write the rules in a machine readable way. So we try and atomize the rules essentially so that they're very addressable, right? So rather than having like huge pages of legal text to plow through, you've got very specific, like uh, rules that controls that follow a schema, and everything's um, displayed the same way, and therefore you can process it into a database, or you can run checks on a per rule basis or something like that. So I think that is also helpful, isn't it? To answer your question in terms of like, how do I know I've met all the regulations?
I love your answer. I love the way you're thinking about it because, it's secure by design, it's governance by design, right? If we have those reference architectures that by default are aligned with, whatever regulatory or compliance posture we need to meet, you're starting off with a baseline that is going to enable, right? Uh,
Mm,
versus having to start from scratch. So to your point earlier that we were talking about the benefit of standardization, right? I think having that um, in that capability of, those golden images or those processes, those standard methods and approaches, that's what really accelerates in a safe way, right? Responsible AI. And I think that's what we're drafting today, right? Is that capability.
I think this is a good place to jump off, actually. That was a really good answer. How about, before we wrap up, Jyoti, um, I want to ask you a couple of final questions. So one is, um, what advice would you have for people starting out in a career in this kind of area, in this sort of the governance space? What advice would you give them?
Um, I would I I would encourage them to be brave. Um,
So
it
bravery
just
is a key requirement for
it is.
yeah.
You need to, take, take your curiosity, take your practice in whatever area that you are, your expertise, in find the application in whatever learning that need to do in your space. It is an investment, and I think it's absolutely essential that this new language be something that everybody can have some common exchange in. So that would be the biggest advice is, hey, take the step, invest, and collaborate, be part of the discussion, and move it forward, but with your involvement as well, your inclusion as well. So that would be my biggest advice.
I think that's an excellent answer because so the whole point of like the risk first book is really to try and sort of uh and introduce the idea of risk management to software developers, really. And I think this is, you're kind of talking to the same thing here. I think there's probably a lot of software developers that are thinking all the stuff that Jyoti's been talking about and Rob's been talking about today, it all sounds really complicated and quite baroque. And they're using a whole new language of things that doesn't really make sense. But I think in terms of like the main themes of what we're talking about, protecting systems and protecting organizations, all this language that we've been using is a response to that requirement, to try and achieve that goal. And yeah, it does sound complicated, but I think when you get into it and you're in that in that world, it what we're trying to do is not like crazy. It's not a total, it's not completely bizarre and unusual. It's actually kind of derived from really simple principles of what we want to get done. But yeah, it just requires that bravery of just jumping in and thinking, right, this is an area I know nothing about. Um, and yet it's really important. It's obviously a lot of people's jobs. It's your job. It's partly my job. And so this is something I should know about. And I think you're right. That is a bravery kind of bravery. And what was the other? Yeah, curiosity, I think you said as well, which, yes, I'm totally on board with what you're saying here.
Yeah, no,
Um,
yeah, go ahead.
all right. Yeah. So final thing then. So have you got any recommendations for people in terms of like books or podcasts or anything else that you want to just touch on that is like going to be of interest to the listeners, readers, watchers, whatever?
Yeah, information is pervasive anywhere. I love getting my blogs. I think there's one chat AI that I get. It's almost like, your chai latte in the morning.
Yeah.
Staying breadth with these newsletters is so interesting because not only will you understand how fast things are moving, but you also capture the main milestones. And then based on that, dig into the areas. Like I cannot count how many blogs or podcasts are out there. But in addition to understanding what's happening, throughout the technology world, I think it's also understanding what is guiding some of these frameworks. And so looking at what are the requirements being put out there. Go ahead and click on NIST and go
Yeah.
through and do a summary review of some of those frameworks. They're going to make more sense than you thought. And they're, I think, interesting. So I think becoming involved and understanding how can your business, like if you have a process, if you're just someone, if you're someone, within your own capacity of doing XYZ, well, what is that process, and is there any opportunity to enable that with AI? And if it is, then what is the initiative you're going to take to try it out, and then bring it up to different steering committees or conversations that you have out there. So I think everything's an opportunity, a resource, but I think once again, it's getting involved. My favorite is the newsletters and blogs. There's different ones in financial services. I love Finos, um,
Oh, yeah,
and
FINOS news. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And, HIMSS is also very interesting, following along some of the working groups there, as well as some of these publications in terms of framework. So those are some ones that I particularly like.
I like that. So yeah, I don't think anyone's recommended to read NIST before. Maybe just go on to ChatGPT and ask it for the top NIST guidance documents or the summary of them. That would be quite a good thing to do. Or a summary of the top MITRE attack or
Exactly.
defend kind of things. Uh, that is an interesting idea. Yeah, that's well worth some people's time. Definitely. All right,
Yes.
Jyoti, this has been the most interrupted podcast I've tried to record, but we've got through it. We've done it.
All right. Are we
This has
done?
been so much fun having you on. Yeah. Thank you so much.